Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We've got a lot to cover this week, including the absolute collapse of Joker Folie à Deux, as well as the surprising opening of Terrifier 3. It was a really interesting confluence of events with Joker falling and Terrifier 3 overperforming. We have an unexpected number one, and we're going to break down all of that right now. So let's look at the box office top 5 for this past weekend. At number one was Terrifier 3, which made $18.3 million in estimates. I've seen reports that when actual numbers come in, we could be more in the $19 million range. I reviewed all three movies here on the channel, and regardless of some of the thoughts, they were a bit too extreme for me. This is a great breakthrough for an indie horror franchise, one that has built a following over the last number of years. And honestly, one of the only great things to happen at the box office this past weekend. It's getting people into theaters, which is a good thing. The last time that an unrated film opened at number one, because Terrifier 3 did not submit to the MPA, so it did not have a motion picture rating. To find the last time that an unrated film opened at number one, you have to go all the way back to, well, it was December of last year, because it was the Renaissance Beyonce concert film, which also was not submitted for rating by the MPA. But still, the fact that an unrated movie is number one, not a concert or a special event, is pretty rare. We don't see that very often because, honestly, not a lot of unrated films get a wide enough release to compete for number one at the box office. In second place was The Wild Robot, which dropped 28.8% in week 3. That's a great hold. Last week, remember, it dropped around 50%, and I said, well, that's because it's lost all of its premium screens. Let's see how it does in week number 3. That's a good hold. It's currently at $83.7 million total. It looks headed for $100 million. I believe they just announced that they're going to be doing a sequel. So all good news for The Wild Robot there. In third place right now is Joker Folie à Deux with a just catastrophic 81.3% drop from its opening weekend. We're going to look a lot more at that number in a few minutes. But if you notice, it's only about $4,000 ahead of Beetlejuice right now, according to the estimates. Now, Warner Brothers overestimated the film by quite a bit last weekend, and honestly, I think that they were doing a little bit of gamesmanship to keep that number at $40 million. It came in substantially below that number, and studios, I think, know a little bit closer to what the final result is going to be than Warner Brothers let on last week. So I think they were trying to save face last weekend with the estimate. And honestly, I think they're trying to save face this weekend with the estimate. It would be no surprise to me if Joker Folie à Deux ends up in fourth place with Beetlejuice taking third place. I think they just wanted to save that last scrap of dignity by not showing that they fell into fourth place on weekend number 2. But honestly, it doesn't matter. This movie's been catastrophic from the beginning as far as box office reception goes. And like I said, we're going to break that down a lot more in a few minutes. In fourth place for now is Beetlejuice in its 6th week of release with just over $7 million. Its domestic total is now at over $275 million. In fifth place was the documentary Piece by Piece, which covers the musician Murrell. It was done in the Lego style. It didn't attract a huge crowd. It brought in $3.8 million, which is good enough for a top 5 debut. Looking at the number 6 position, we have Transformers 1 in its 4th week of release at $3.65 million, dropping 32.2% from last weekend. Its domestic total is now over $50 million, but it is still going to be the lowest grossing Transformers film since the original animated film back in the 1980s. Saturday Night didn't make a whole lot of noise as it rolled out to wide release with a huge expansion. It made $3.4 million. Its domestic total is now at over $4.1 million, and I think it validates a little bit of what I said in my review of the film, which was that I don't quite know what the audience for the film is. Is it the hardcore SNL fan? Will people that don't watch the show be interested in the film? Well, it didn't pick up a whole lot of interest in weekend number 1. In 8th is the movie My Hero Academia, You're Next, which made just over $3 million. This is the 4th film to spin out of the popular manga and then later anime series. It opened in Japan back in August and is good enough for a top 10 debut here. In 9th place is the re-release of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It is Halloween after all. It brought in $2.3 million. And in 10th place right now, it's a pretty close race between this movie and Speak No Evil for number 10. is The Apprentice, the Donald Trump biopic that generated a firestorm of controversy. A lot of distributors stayed away from it. It was picked up by Briarcliff and it made $1.58 million, so not a huge amount of public interest despite a wide opening for The Apprentice. I did see The Apprentice last week, and honestly, I feel kind of like I did about the SNL movie. What's the audience for this? I thought the first half of the film was actually a pretty interesting look at the origins, not in a political sense, just in a public figure sense, of Donald Trump and his interaction with Roy Cohn and how that worldview may have been impressed upon him that we would see in the White House later in life. The second half of the film for me was very much kind of a tabloidy type thing, going over things we've all heard before. It didn't really hold a whole lot of insight. And again, it just kind of returns to the thing of like, well, who's going to go see that movie? Well, the answer is not a whole lot of people. So the big stories this weekend obviously were Terrifier 3's great opening and Joker Folie à Deux's terrible drop. And I actually ran a member poll here on the channel late in the weekend to see what the people who are members here thought was the biggest surprise of the weekend. And by a 2-to-1 margin, they named Terrifier 3 opening number 1 as the biggest surprise this weekend over Joker 2's big drop. That came in at 34%. By the way, member polls are something I'm going to be incorporating into the show more and more. So if you'd like to be a member here on the channel, depending on where you're watching, there should be a join button. If not, there's a link down in the description below that should be able to take you to join and become a member, because I'd like to hear your voice on these member polls, and I think it's a fun new thing to incorporate here into the channel. So let's talk a little bit about Terrifier 3. This is a huge win for Cineverse, which is the distributor of the film. They also run the Bloody Disgusting streaming platform, and they are a distributor that has little to no experience with wide theatrical releases, and yet they took Terrifier 3 to number 1 with over $18 million. That's extremely impressive. And when you look at the breakdowns of this movie and who went to see it, once again, this is a film that was led largely by Latino and Hispanic crowds. They were the largest demographic to show up and see Terrifier 3. We've seen that several times this year. When a movie is underestimated at the box office or does one of these growth through the weekend things, one of the big reasons often is that the Latino and Hispanic crowd is showing up. They don't necessarily pop up in pre-sales. There was a lot of day of ticket sales for the film. And in general, this was just a fan-driven movie. Cineverse put in, I think, less than $5 million all in for Terrifier 3. So it wasn't driven by a huge marketing push. It wasn't driven by, appearances on talk shows and Jimmy Fallon and all that stuff. This was word of mouth. This was enthusiasm for the franchise. And when you look at the growth of the Terrifier franchise, these are the opening weekends for the 3 Terrifier films. The first one opened to a little over $123,000. The second one opened to over $800,000 and then had that great box office run that we covered here on the show. And then we jump up to $18.3 million at least, probably more when we get final numbers, for Terrifier 3. That is explosive organic growth. And Cineverse knew what they had. They knew how many theaters to open it in. They knew what they needed to market the film. So this is really a great success story if we're talking about independent films, if we're talking about unrated films, the horror genre. It's there's really nothing to criticize here. Terrifier 3 did great. There's going to be a Terrifier 4, and if they keep that budget point low as they have been doing, then I think we're looking at a very lucrative franchise. It doesn't have to make $100 million when you only spend $5, including marketing. Terrifier 3 was the 4th best horror opening weekend of 2024, coming in behind Longlegs and ahead of The Strangers Chapter 1. A Quiet Place Day 1 and Alien Romulus remain easily the 2 highest opening horror films of the year so far. And Terrifier 3 is basically everything that Joker Folie à Deux was not, which is number 1, a box office success, and number 2, a movie that gave fans something that they wanted. Something that they enjoyed, something that they expected. We broke down extensively last week why Joker 2 may not have opened well. Well, as expected, the bottom absolutely fell out, but to a degree that may surprise people that were expecting a big fall. So let's kind of break down this 81% plus drop for Joker Folie à Deux. Try to put it in a little bit of context. And let's look at it, first of all, in the context of Marvel and DC characters. Joker Folie à Deux had the biggest second weekend drop-off by percentage of any film ever made about a Marvel or DC character. It beats the record that was set by the Marvels late last year, which dropped off 78.1%. The Joker is an easy number one at 81.3%. Steel dropped off 78%. Morbius dropped off 73.9%. And The Flash dropped off 72.5%. So Joker rewriting the record book in the wrong way when it comes to Marvel and DC characters. As far as second weekend drop-offs for movies that opened in 4,000 or more theaters, Joker Folie à Deux had the biggest drop-off for that release structure. 81.3%. That beats the Marvels at number 2, which opened in 4,030 theaters at 78.1%. Morbius is at number 3 at 73.8%. Onwards at number 4, its second weekend was heavily impacted by theater closures and people just staying home due to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. It dropped 72.9%, and then we had The Flash at 72.5%. When you look at movies that were released in 3,000 theaters or more all time, Joker Folie à Deux is still number 1. It breaks a 15-year-old record, which was set by the 2009 remake of Friday the 13th, which dropped at 80.4% back in February of 2009. So again, rewriting the record books in the wrong way, but hey, Friday the 13th is finally off the hook. At number 3 was Halloween Ends, which dropped 80% back in 2022. The Marvels is there at number 4, and then 2018's Mortal Engines is at number 5. It dropped off 76.8%. Okay, so we've done 4,000 theaters, 3,000 theaters. What about movies that opened in 2,000 or more theaters? Well, the Joker makes the top 5 here too. At number 1 is the movie Collide, which actually I believe holds the record for the biggest drop-off ever of a movie between weekend number 1 and weekend number 2. It dropped 88.5%. It's a Nicholas Hoult, Felicity Jones, Anthony Hopkins drug smuggling thriller set in Europe, and it was yanked from over half its theaters in week 2. Keep in mind, Joker Folie à Deux wasn't yanked from any theaters in weekend number 2. At number 2 is Geely, which dropped 81.9% in 2,215 theaters, one of the all-time box office bombs. Then we have Replicas starring Keanu Reeves, which dropped 81.5% in 2,300 theaters. And then we have Joker Folie à Deux at 81.3%. And keep in mind, if Warner Brothers did overestimate the film's weekend gross, then it could easily move up into the number 3 or even the number 2 spot as far as this list goes. And I'll update next week if I need to. Rounding out the top 5 is Friday the 13th from back in 2009 at 80.4%. So we've done 4,000 theaters, 3,000 theaters, 2,000 theaters. What about movies that opened in 1,000 theaters or more, which is the modern definition of a wide release? Well, as of right now, Joker Folie à Deux is literally just outside the top 10. When it comes to second weekend drop-offs for movies in 1,000 theaters or more, at number 1 is Collide with 88.5%. Then we have National Champions, which was a very somewhat limited COVID era-ish release, which dropped off 88.4%. Then we have the I Want to Be a Star drama Undiscovered, which dropped off 86.4%. Those are very bad times for Ashley Simpson. At number 4, we have a movie that came out earlier this year, which was Boy Kills World, dropping off 85.1% in its second weekend. At number 5 is Slow Burn, a 2007 crime drama starring Ray Liotta, LL Cool J, and Mekhi Phifer. It dropped off 84.7%. Then we have Jane Got a Gun at number 6, which dropped 83.5%. It's a Natalie Portman Western, maybe best known for losing director Lynn Ramsey and key cast members on the first day of shooting. At number 7 is Before I Go to Sleep. These are some obscure movies, which is a Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth thriller version of 50 First Dates or Memento or Clean Slate if you're a Dana Carvey fan. Basically, Nicole Kidman loses her memory every day. It dropped 82%. Then we have Geely there at number 8 at 81.9%. Medieval at number 9, which dropped 81.7%. Another early theaters reopening COVID era drama starring Ben Foster. It's a war movie set in the 15th century. Michael Caine's also in that movie. And then right now at number 10 is Replicas at 81.5%, but literally Joker Folie à Deux is the next movie in line. So if it didn't make as much as Warner Brothers says it did, as the estimates say, then we could very easily see Joker Folie à Deux become one of the worst performing wide releases of all time in 1,000 theaters or more, which would be pretty spectacular, especially because Joker Folie à Deux is much bigger with a much higher budget than any of these other movies. Just an absolute catastrophe. And the financial picture for Joker Folie à Deux is now beginning to crystallize because we have those second week numbers. There is going to be no rally. There's going to be no major comeback. And when we look at how much money Warner Brothers is in line to lose here, the movie has not yet come out in China, so we don't know how much it's going to make there yet. Internationally, it's at $113.7 million. About $45.4 million of that comes back to the investors because you only get about 40% back from the international box office. The 60% cut of the domestic week one box office comes out to about $26.7 million. And then the cut of weekend number 2 comes out to about $3.8 million. There's really no gas left in the tank for Joker Folie à Deux domestically. It's going to probably end up at 75 million-ish, maybe, definitely under $100 million. And when you look at the money that was put into the film, reportedly a budget of $190 million, reportedly a marketing budget of $100 million, so that's a $290 million cost. The movie's gross right now is $165.3 million. I estimate a net of about $76 million. Put it up against the cost of $290 million, and right now Joker Folie à Deux is facing a theatrical shortfall of $213.9 million, and there's not much more that's going to go into that pot. Because as we'll see internationally, the bottom fell out there as well. I'm not expecting a huge gross from China. So it looks very likely that Warner Brothers is going to lose about $200 million on this movie, which is not something that is good in any iteration. But David Zaslav's Warner Brothers is not looking for these kinds of flops, and they've had a few of them. So from a studio standpoint and a box office standpoint, this was, I think in a way beyond the worst case scenario for Joker Folie à Deux. I know that it's not all about money. Maybe Todd Phillips made the movie that he wanted to make. Maybe he's delighted with the film, but this is not going to be a success story as far as the studio goes, because I really doubt that they made plans to lose $200 million on a pet project that was just going to make Todd Phillips happy. It didn't make a whole lot of other people happy. And this is going to be a really interesting case study, I think, in the years to come about a studio greenlighting a sequel that just utterly failed to deliver what audiences wanted or expected. And the fallout, I think, is not going to affect Todd Phillips or Joaquin Phoenix or Lady Gaga. They got their big paychecks. They're done. They got the money. I think it's going to affect the filmmakers that walk through the door next at Warner Brothers and say, hey, I have a movie that's kind of a risk. I think they're going to be a lot less likely to greenlight that risk, as well as maybe less likely to greenlight some films in general because they just took this huge loss. Are we going to see more tax write-offs? There are consequences to this, and that's why I didn't really quite agree with Todd Phillips when he said, well, pre-release, why is everybody so concerned about the budget of this movie? What does it matter to them? Well, it may not matter to you, but it matters to a lot of other people who have to walk through the door after you. So yeah, interesting story here, and all of the ways that Warner Brothers Discovery would probably wish that it wasn't. One quick note as well on The Wild Robot, which was the number 2 film in the country this past weekend. It's now moved up to 6th place as far as the highest grosses for a non-sequel or remake. And yes, I know Garfield's on there. Again, it's not a direct sequel to another Garfield movie, and it's not a remake of any other Garfield movie. It's a borderline case, I acknowledge. But right now it's at $83.7 million. And if The Wild Robot hits that $100 million mark, it'll be just the 3rd movie this year that was not a sequel or a remake to make $100+ million. I will, of course, keep tracking The Wild Robot in the weeks ahead, but I'm happy to see that it's sticking around. Due to the number of new movies in the top 10 this weekend, we had a rare 6-film dropout. So dropping out of the top 10 this week, we had Deadpool and Wolverine after 11 weeks, so it stays tied with Inside Out as far as most weeks in the top 10 this year. Speak No Evil's out after 4 weeks as of now. We'll see what the final numbers say. Megalopolis is out after 2 weeks. The Substance jumped back into the top 10 last weekend, but it's now out again after 1 week, so it's its second appearance in the domestic top 10. Then we have Whitebird, A Wonder Story, which is out of the top 10 after 1 week, and Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal, which is also out of the top 10 after a 1-week run. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Saturday night had the biggest change in theaters. It expanded to 2,288 theaters for a total of 2,309. Given the box office results, it seems perhaps maybe that expansion should have gone a little more slowly because the revenue did not jump up to the degree that an expansion of this size would seem to justify. Megalopolis lost 1,627 theaters. It's now in only 227, so that 2-week window ran out for Megalopolis. Never Let Go lost 734 theaters. It's now in 247. Speak No Evil lost 677 theaters. It's still in 1,602. And Deadpool and Wolverine lost 615 theaters, which takes it out of wide release. It's now in 990 theaters as it rolls out on digital platforms and physical media. Looking at what I like to call our road to recovery, the red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2023. The blue line is the weekend average for 2015 to 2019, and that dotted black line is every weekend this year. And you can see that this past weekend we were healthily below not only where we were pre-pandemic, but also where we have been the last few years. That's bolstered, of course, by the fact that last year on this weekend, we saw the release of Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour, which is a hugely successful movie. Combine that with the extremely disappointing performance of Joker Folie à Deux, and this has really been an October to forget at the box office so far, despite movies like Terrifier 3 breaking out. When it comes to big studio films, big studio tentpoles, they've either been failures or slow burns like The Wild Robot. So we are having kind of an early summer type run right now where we just keep underperforming what we should be doing or just barely matching what we have been doing. So Hollywood is going to be looking for a very strong close to 2024 because we've had some high highs, but we've also had some pretty low lows. Let's turn our attention now to the international scene, everything playing outside of the US and Canada. And when we look at the top 5 films internationally, the #1 movie is The Wild Robot, which brought in $24 million as it rolls out kind of a rolling rollout into different countries around the world. Joker Folie à Deux falls down to second place at $22.7 million. The Chinese film The Volunteers to the War 2 comes in third at $10.6 million. Then we have Transformers 1 at $6.2 million. And The Substance, which is rolling out around the world, comes in fifth place at just over $5 million. When you take those international grosses, you combine them with our domestic numbers, you get the top 5 films worldwide, and the #1 movie in the world is The Wild Robot at $37.5 million. That's an 18.4% increase in business from last weekend as it hits those new markets. If there was a hope that Joker Folie à Deux would connect with an international audience, maybe Americans are too picky, well, those hopes were dashed this past weekend because the film dropped 75.4% worldwide, just a little less drastic than we saw domestically, to 29.7 million. So yeah, this movie is DOA pretty much everywhere around the world. Terrifier 3 brings in $23.1 million worldwide, led of course very heavily by its domestic debut. Beetlejuice brings in another $11.6 million, a 37.1% drop from last weekend. And as we often see with films from China, especially ones that are released during holiday periods, The Volunteers to the War 2 takes a big tumble. In its second week on the chart, it dropped 76.3% for another $10.6 million. We've got lots more to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsors for this week's show. This episode's brought to you by Mando. Even when you think your day is going to plan, you never quite know when you'll get thrown a curveball. With Mando, you don't have to worry about unexpected plans leaving you stinky when you don't want to be because it's clinically proven to control odor for 72 hours. The other day, my best friend called me last minute and asked if I could watch his kids after school while he went to the dentist. There's just one problem. I was already at the gym. But not having time to run home and shower wasn't an issue because Mando keeps me smelling fresh all day, even after a long workout. I keep a stick of Mando Mount Fuji scented deodorant in my gym bag for that exact reason. And in addition to their whole body deodorant, they also make deodorant wipes, body wash, a cleansing bar, and more to keep every part of your body smelling great. Whether you're in a hurry or want to walk out of the shower smelling amazing, Mando has the product for you. And it was created by a doctor right here in the USA specifically to fight back against how BO is being misdiagnosed and treated. Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash or deodorant wipes, and free shipping. I'm a Mount Fuji in the pits, bourbon leather, and the rinse kind of guy, but you can try your own combination and see what you like. And I do have that discount code to help you get hooked on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code that equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code DAN at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com. Once again, that promo code is DAN at shopmando.com. Thanks to Mando for sponsoring this video. This episode's brought to you by Miracle Made. It's spooky season, the perfect time of year to snuggle up under the covers and watch your favorite scary movie. And whether you're under the sheets or peeking over them, it's great to know that the ones that are on your bed will keep you comfortable no matter what. Miracle Made sheets are designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long using silver-infused fabrics inspired by NASA. This time of year, the temperature can swing 30 degrees from one day to the next here in Arkansas, but I don't have to worry about constantly adjusting my bedding to compensate because Miracle Made will keep me cool on the hot nights and warm on the cool nights. Not only do the sheets keep me cool, they're also so comfortable, nicer than the sheets in some fancy hotels I've stayed in, and they don't have the high price tag of other luxury brands. With Miracle Made, you can sleep like a millionaire without having to empty your bank account. Go to trymiracle.com/Dan to try Miracle Made sheets today, and whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. Plus, if you use our promo code Dan at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle's so confident in their product that it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/Dan and use the code Dan to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/Dan to treat yourself. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. Before we look at the specialty box office charts, as we often do here on the show, I want to go back to last week's show and look at some of the revised charts, some of the numbers that came in once the final figures were available. And I mentioned that Warner Brothers had underestimated Joker Folie à Deux last weekend. This was the final box office top 5. Warner Brothers estimated the film at $40 million. It came in at $37.6 million. And again, I think that Warner Brothers knew that it was going to come in at that number, but it was just close enough that they could justify estimating it at $40 million because that's a pretty big miss. We usually don't see studios missing an estimate by over $2 million. The Wild Robot's final number was at just under $19 million, with Beetlejuice coming in at $10.1 million, Transformers 1 coming in at $5.3 million, and Speaking of Evil coming in the number 5 spot at $2.7 million. Also, a correction on the per theater averages from last weekend. The movie Look Back was listed at number 1 on last week's chart, but that's because the theater count was wrong on multiple box office reporting sites, and this is becoming more and more common. They, for whatever reason, have been extremely inaccurate over the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 months, to the point where I used to have to just check the two sites against each other. And I'm talking about the Numbers and Box Office Mojo, which are my two major sources as far as box office information. Now I'm getting to a point where I have to check each box office figure against 3 to 4 different box office reporting sites to make sure there are no discrepancies, which is very time consuming and is increasing the time it takes for me to prep the show. So come on, get it together. At this point, I'm like, hire me. I'll try to keep this stuff straight because the theater count on Look Back was way off. We'll look at that in just a second. But the top per theater average for October 4th through the 6th actually did go to Saturday night, which made $13,000 per theater in 21 theaters. Of course, that number dropped drastically this past weekend. Joker Folie à Deux came in second at $9,751 in just over 4,000 theaters. The documentary Separated was in third. Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal, was in fourth. And in fifth was a movie that reported late. It's a documentary called Leap of Faith, which played in 7 theaters and made $4,808 per theater. And then the revised limited release chart for October 4th through the 6th saw Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal at number 1 at $1.7 million. And then we have Look Back, which actually played in 535 theaters, not the, I think, 2 theaters that were listed. So obviously some outdated numbers on last week's charts. Its total for the debut film and limited release was just under $700,000. Then we had the live stream from the Met Opera at just under $600,000. The Outrun at number 4 at just over $300,000, and Lee close behind at $310,000. All right, now let's move to this past weekend and the top per theater averages. And at number 1 is the Andrew Garfield Florence Pugh drama We Live in Time, which will be rolling out slowly over the next few weeks. It started out in 5 theaters and had one of the best per theater averages of the year at $45,182 per theater. Then we had Terrifier 3, which brought in $7,279 in 2,514 theaters. So this is a very appropriate number of theaters to book Terrifier 3. And again, I have to give kudos to Cineverse with the distribution on this film. They didn't put it in too few so that there was basically not enough theaters to meet the demand, but they didn't put it in so many that it drove the average down. That's a nice average for Terrifier 3. The Cruise comes in third place. It was playing in just one theater. It's a re-release of a 1998 documentary about an eccentric New York City bus tour guide. This is the first film from Bennett Miller, who'd go on to direct Capote, Moneyball, and Foxcatcher. The Wild Robot comes in fourth place at $3,490 per theater. And then in fifth place, we have a film from India called Vitayan. It's a Tamil language film about a renegade cop who doesn't play by the rules. It was playing at 440 theaters and brought in $2,867 per theater. And when we look at the top per theater averages of 2024, Kinds of Kindness remains at number 1 with its $75,000 per theater average back in June. Then we have Saturday Night's opening weekend just a couple weeks ago, which brought in $54,000 per theater. Deadpool and Wolverine's in third with just over $50,000 per theater and 4,210 theaters. Then we have We Live in Time, which opened to $45,182 per theater. That's the fourth best per theater average of the year. And then we have The Taste of Things, which was at one point number 1 with its $43,350 per theater average back in February of this year, opening in 3 theaters. Looking at the top films in limited release, so these were movies in 1,000 theaters or fewer. Vitayan was number 1, which brought in $1.2 million. Then we have a pretty big drop down to Look Back, which stays at number 2 at just under $240,000 total. Its theater count dropped to 162 theaters. In third place is another Indian film, which I'm probably going to butcher here, Mitran Da Chalaya Trukni, which was in an unknown number of theaters, but brought in about $237,000. Then We Live in Time, which comes in fourth place, made $225,000. And finally, Lee rounds out the top 5 as far as limited release films, bringing in just over $100,000. This is the 2024 fall holiday box office chart, so these are all releases post-Labor Day through the end of the year. Beetlejuice remains the runaway number 1 movie of the season so far at $275.6 million. The Wild Robot stays in second place. Transformers 1 is currently in third. Joker Folie Adieu is just behind Transformers 1 in fourth place. Speak No Evil is in fifth place. Terrifier 3 debuts at the number 6 spot, which drops Am I Racist down to number 7. The Substance holds steady at number 8 because it also passed Never Let Go. So Never Let Go drops down 2 spots to number 9. Megalopolis is now at number 10. And Devara Part 1 drops off of our seasonal chart. Looking at the top films for 2024 domestically, Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine are the 2 runaway box office successes of the year. Despicable Me 4 is right up there at $361 million. Dune Part 2 remains at number 4. Beetlejuice is at number 5 and is very close to bypassing Dune Part 2 to become the 4th highest grossing film of the year. Twisters drops down 1 spot to number 6, and then 7 through 10 remain the same, with Godzilla Kong the New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Before we move on to the streaming charts, as we often do here on the show, I want to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and we're going to go back 12 years to October 12th through the 14th, 2012, when Taken 2 was the number 1 movie at the box office, bringing in $21.8 million. It would end up with around $140 million domestically, and I remember one of the first episodes I ever edited for the Screen Junkie show was a tie-in to Taken 2, which also means it's been about 12 years since I started working as an editor at Screen Junkies. That is hard to believe. In second place is Argo. You know, we talked about Geely so much on the show. I wanted to give Ben Affleck a little bit of love. It opened in second place at $19.4 million. It ended up at around $136 million, and of course, eventually became the Best Picture winner for 2012, despite the fact that Ben Affleck was snubbed in the Best Director race. In third place was Sinister, which I think is a pretty good horror film. It opened at just over $18 million, but the air went out of the balloon pretty quick. Its final domestic total came in at under $50 million. However, it was a very low-budget film, which is why we got a sequel to the first Sinister film. Hotel Transylvania 2, in its third week of release, came in fourth place at $17.2 million. It ended up at $148 million domestically. And then in fifth place is a movie that I probably haven't thought of since 2012. Kevin James's MMA comedy Here Comes the Boom, which opened to $11.8 million and ended up at $45.2 million domestically. So that's what's going on at the box office. Let's take a look now at the world of streaming, and we will start with the last week of numbers that we have for Netflix. This covers the week of September 30th to October 6th, and the number one performing program on Netflix for that week was The Platform 2, which opened up with 19.37 million views. This was a follow-up to a pandemic-era hit for Netflix. Then we have Monsters, Lyle and Eric Menendez, which continued its run, bringing in 15.94 million views. Nobody Wants This comes in third place with 13 million views. I think it was just renewed for a second season, which is ironic because apparently somebody wants that show. In fourth place is a Netflix original movie called Trouble, which is a Swedish film about a TV installer wrongfully jailed for murder. It brought in 9.98 million views. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Sometimes just a random movie will pop up on this chart. Just over 7 million views, good enough for fifth place. Then we have Jailbreak Love on the Run at 6.47 million views. Sing hits the top 10 at number 7 at 5.56 million views. Rebel Ridge stays in the top 10 at 5.45 million views. Then we have the debut of Love is Blind Season 7 at 5.2 million views, and the Garfield movie rounding out the top 10 as far as most watched programs globally on Netflix at 4.93 million views. When we look at the most watched movies on Netflix in 2024, and again, these are global numbers, Rebel Ridge moves up to number 4. It's the fourth Netflix film of the year to surpass 100 million views around the world, and it puts Lift down to number 5 and Society of the Snow down to number 6. And if Rebel Ridge keeps on, it could very easily find itself in that number 2 spot above Under Paris and The Union. I'm happy to see this movie doing well. I regret not reviewing it on the channel. I just had a busy week that week with everything that I'm getting set up here, so I didn't do a review of it, but it is a very good movie, and I'm glad to see that it's doing well. The rare Netflix movie that's actually pretty good that also performs well on the streaming service. Looking at the most watched shows of 2024 so far, The Perfect Couple moves into the top 10 at 62.41 million views. That bumps Griselda down to number 6 and Avatar: The Last Airbender down to number 7. Emily in Paris moves up one spot to number 8, which bumps Three Body Problem down to number 9. American Nightmare is still at number 10, and the top 4 remain the same, with Bridgerton Season 3, Fool Me Once, Baby Reindeer, and The Gentleman Season 1. When we look at the most watched Netflix programs overall for the year, Rebel Ridge moves into the top 5. Again, it's only the 5th Netflix program, movie, or show this year to break 100 million views, and it could be at number 3 perhaps by next week. It's close to Bridgerton Season 3, honestly, for that number 2 spot. Lift moves down to number 6, Society of the Snow moves down to number 7, Fool Me Once moves down to number 8, and numbers 9 and 10 are the same with Baby Reindeer and A Family Affair. Let's move now to the Nielsen charts, which are domestic numbers only. These are not global viewing numbers, and they are delayed by about a month because that's just how Nielsen does things. And let's look first at the top 10 most watched streaming movies here in the US for September 9th through the 15th, which sees Rebel Ridge continuing its run at number 1 with 21.3 million hours watched, one of the best weekends for a movie this year, just outside the top 5. Uglies debuted on Netflix with 9.3 million hours watched in second place. Then we have Edge of Tomorrow in third place at 6.8 million hours watched. Beetlejuice on Max is at number 4 as people watch the original as the sequel was making its way through theaters. The Deliverance is at number 5. Sonic the Hedgehog is at number 6. Civil War makes its debut on Max at number 7 at 3.3 million hours watched. Then we have The Fall Guy on Peacock, Black Mass on Netflix debuting at number 9, and the Super Mario Brothers movie hitting number 10. Usually if there's a week on the movie streaming chart, you're going to see either Moana or the Super Mario Brothers movie. Looking at the most watched movies this year streaming here in the US, according to Nielsen, Rebel Ridge is now in that top 10 at 39.8 million hours watched, which drops Lift out of the top 10. And there's a lot of room for growth with Rebel Ridge, so we'll see how it does in the weeks ahead. And looking at the most watched streaming shows here in the US for the week of September 9th through the 15th, The Perfect Couple's at number 1 at 32.8 million hours watched. This was its first full week on Netflix. In second place is Bluey at 14.5 million hours watched, followed by Family Guy in third place, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, which still is not at the top of the chart at 12.4 million hours watched. The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives debuts on the chart at number 5. That's a show on Hulu. It brings in 12.15 million hours watched. Emily in Paris returns to the chart with the debut of the second part of its current season at 11.8 million hours watched. Then we have Bob's Burgers in 7th, Grey's Anatomy in 8th, Prison Break in 9th, and Gilmore Girls returning to the chart at number 10 with 9.6 million hours watched. When we take the Nielsen Top 20 streaming shows and we look at the 10 most popular shows as far as watch time per episode, The Perfect Couple comes in at number 1 with 5.47 million hours watched per episode, followed by Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, which brought in just over 4 million hours watched per episode. The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives breaks over 1 million hours watched per episode. Then we have The Rings of Power at number 4 at under 1 million hours watched per episode. Again, this is for seasons 1 and 2. Chaos is at number 5 with just over 800,000 hours watched per episode. Unfortunately, I believe that show has now been canceled at Netflix. At number 6 is Outlast, followed by A Discovery of Witches, Emily in Paris, Only Murders in the Building at number 9, and Prison Break at number 10. And as far as the highest weekly performances, as far as hours watched per episode, The Perfect Couple puts in a top 5 performance there. 5.47 million hours watched per episode for the week of September 9th through the 15th is good enough for number 5 on that list, coming in behind Testament, the story of Moses back in March, Fallout back in April, American Nightmare back in January, and Fool Me Once also back in January. All of those shows except for Fallout coming from Netflix. And that does it for the show this week. Let's take a look at just a few of the things that'll be heading your way as far as streaming and theatrical releases over the coming week. On Wednesday, Hush will be hitting select theaters. If you haven't seen Mike Flanagan's 2016 film, then it is definitely worth your time. It was a Netflix exclusive when it debuted on streaming, and currently it's not available to stream for free anywhere. It's only available for rent. So this is the first time that movie has hit theaters, and if you haven't seen it, if you're looking for a good Halloween season movie, then I definitely recommend Hush because it's really good, and I think it'd be even better in a theater. Also on Wednesday, Shrinking Season 2 debuts on Apple TV+. On Thursday, The Lincoln Lawyer Season 3 debuts on Netflix. And also on Thursday is the Amazon Prime original movie Brothers, starring Josh Brolin and Peter Dinklage. I think I might check that out because the trailer looked pretty funny. Then on Friday, the big theatrical release is Smile 2, the sequel to the surprise horror hit from a couple of years ago. Also, if you're into the awards scene at all, this is a must-see movie, Anora. The buzz has been swirling around this movie since it won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Mikey Madison stars in the story of a sex worker who marries the son of a Russian billionaire and has to deal with the fallout. Anora is from director Sean Baker and is a frontrunner in several different Oscar categories, according to the prognosticators, although it's a long time till we get to the Academy Awards. A Nightmare Before Christmas has hit theaters, which means that Hocus Pocus, the other film that now gets an annual theatrical re-release, will be hitting theaters this weekend. Also hitting some theaters is a movie called Goodrich. Michael Keaton is forced to reconnect with his grown daughter, played by Mila Kunis, when his new wife leaves him alone with his young children. Hitting in limited theaters as well is Exhibiting Forgiveness, which is a festival circuit hit about a young artist played by Andre Holland who channels his past into his work, but is forced to confront his father directly. Andra Day also co-stars, and I saw this film online at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year, and the performances in this film are absolutely incredible. So if it's playing near you and you love good acting, check out Exhibiting Forgiveness. Also hitting select theaters is Kensuke's Kingdom, which is a 2D animated film about a young boy trapped on an island following a shipwreck. This is based on the 1999 kids novel. Also opening in limited theaters this Friday is Rumors. Cate Blanchett and Charles Dance are among the cast in a satire about global superpowers set at the G7 summit. And then hitting Netflix this Friday is a movie called Woman of the Hour. Anna Kendrick directs and stars in this true story about a woman who unintentionally picks a serial killer on the 1970s show The Dating Game. If you love Back to the Future, this Saturday night, we're not going Back to the Future. We're going to see Back to the Future Part 2, which hits theaters on Saturday as well as next Monday in a Fathom Events re-release to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the film. And then on Sunday, if you want to play a game, you're in luck because Saw hits theaters in its unrated version. This is a 20th anniversary celebration, and it will also be playing in theaters next Wednesday. And that does it for charts this week. Stay tuned right here on the channel. I'll be following a lot of the stories, of course, that we talked about, as well as doing box office and movie reviews and all the other stuff that we do here. Don't forget that if you want to become a member, take a part in those member polls, then you can find that information somewhere down below, depending on where you're watching. And thank you to the sponsors, Mando and Miracle Made. You can find more about both of them in the description below as well. Thank you for spending a big chunk of your Monday here with me. Until next time, stay safe. And I'll see you then. Bye.